So I want to apologize to Detroit fans for opening up old wounds with a video I did this morning on the 1994 first round between Detroit and San Jose. That was just such a shocker for me. I thought, I've got to put that in this playlist. And remember that once I get up to 2019 and we discuss 2019 series, I intend to go right back to 81 and start it all over again. So that's the plan, and I'll just keep rotating, cycling through that playlist until probably forever, because that's where we're at right now, right? It's the never-ending off season that we're in. It's been almost a month already, so yeah. Now, top 15 Red Wings is a bit of a challenge because who I like, who my favorites are, probably not going to match up with most Red Wing fans when it comes to their all-time favorites, because it's not just about talent, it's about work, and just being my favorite player doesn't necessarily mean being the best on the team. In that vein, number 15, Tim Cheveldae. Tim Cheveldae was a good goaltender for a good team, and then they decided to try to upgrade from him to Bob Essensa. I never understood that move. I thought it was lateral. Now, I will say this. At the time Tim Cheveldae's play was falling off, and it was noticeable. And so I understood what Detroit did. I just didn't. The Essensa deal was still weird to me. So Cheveldae, one of my favorite members of Detroit. He played a ton of games, late 80s, early 90s for Detroit. And it was between him and Greg Stefan for me. I thought, one of the goaltenders that I liked should get in here. And Glenn Hanlon I thought of as well, but Hanlon didn't play that long, or that. So I go with Cheveldae as 15, although I could argue Hanlon in that spot as well. Number 14. The best dollar ever spent was spent by the Detroit Red Wings to get Kris Draper. And it was a move that Winnipeg made because Draper was seen as a failure at the NHL level. Which, okay, if you're looking for the scoring, yes. But what Detroit did with him was they changed his game. So, and they did this with other players as well. Matthew Dandino comes to mind. Dandino went to Detroit, not really thought of very much as a player, and he became a key part of those Stanley Cup winners. And Detroit was masterful of that. Now, whether that's Scotty Bowman that's masterful of it, or whether it's just the organization, Detroit was very good at getting players that other teams didn't want and making them great. And I can't think of a better example than Draper, where he wasn't really highly thought of in Winnipeg, goes to Detroit on a dollar, and he turns into a fantastic player for them. Number 13. Thought more of as a coach now than as a player. But Gerard Gallant, he had a couple of really good years in Detroit. He wouldn't spend his whole career in Detroit. By the time they're winning Stanley Cups, he's off. But he was a key player during the late 80s. And he and Yzerman tied at the hip. So does this mean Gallant ends up being the coach pretty soon? That's been speculated upon since Gallant was fired by Vegas. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. But I don't know. We'll see what happens with Gallant, what happens with Blashill. If Yzerman says, you know what, I didn't give Blashill anything more than a dog's breakfast for a team this year, so it's not on him, and I'll keep him around for another year. We'll see. But Gallant definitely has earned the right to coach again. But he was a pretty good player before he was a coach. And you could kind of see in his game that he would make a good coach, where he was physical, he could score at times, he played good defense, a little bit everything, and those are the guys that make good coaches because they know all of the various aspects of the game. Number 12. Going back to the 80s on this one. John Ogrodnick. The 80s, there were some tough years in the 80s. John Ogrodnick was there for them. And so when you're a good player on a bad team or a mediocre team, it's easy to get overlooked during your era. I think Ogrodnick's one of those guys. And so for me, he was one of my favorite Red Wings. Not necessarily my favorite at that point, but he was one of my favorites. And Ogrodnick, yeah, he belongs on this list as far as I'm concerned. Detroit's had a very long, storied history, a lot of championships over the last 30 years, but John Ogrodnick was there when there weren't championships. There wasn't discussion of championships. There weren't going to be championships. Number 11. the team that he was playing for very often. Number 11, just outside the top 10, a player who got better as his career went along. He even got better after he left and went to Atlanta, and that's Slava Kozlov. Kozlov, one of those guys who Detroit kind of steals. Detroit had a lot of players that weren't highly sought after that they would pick up either late in the draft as free agents or for $1. It was really masterfully put together, that whole team. And Detroit was one scary franchise for a long while there. Slava Kozlov was easily lost in the mix. There were times he's like third line. Sometimes, top six, sure, but sometimes he's third line. And it didn't really matter. They could interchange their lines, and just, the 93-94 video I did this morning, it's stunning the amount of Hall of Famers, the amount of great players there were on that 93-94 team that lost in round one, and Kozlov was on that team as well. Number 10. And I know he's going to be low compared to most Red Wing lists. Keep in mind when I'm talking about players that I cheered for, they have to be players I watched. So you're not going to see Gordie Howe, Alex Delvecchio, Terry Sawchuk. I'm not that old. Henrik Zetterberg. I am old enough to remember Henrik Zetterberg, and of course his career was ended early. Absolute shame about that. Zetterberg, the question of whether or not he's a Hall of Famer, we'll find out in another couple of years. Once he's been out of the league long enough that he's eligible, we'll see if he gets in. My vote would be yes, but it is an ongoing discussion that I see every now and then crop up on the internet, and we'll see if they're seen as if he's seen as being worthy of such consideration. I would put him in, but I can understand if they don't necessarily, but we'll see. Almost 1,000 points, would have hit 1,000, but didn't. And with careers now, and with that lost year in 04-05, and now we're going to look at an incompleted season, regular season wise, for 2019-2020. I can't see them. If they salvage anything, it's just going to be playoffs, let's be honest. So there's going to be a lot of careers that we look back at and say, wow, if we didn't have stoppages, what could have happened? 2012, 2013 being another one. So Zetterberg, his numbers get hurt by some stoppages and lockouts. Obviously not this year's, because he's out of the league. Number 9. Number 9 on the overall list. All right. It's amazing to me that Chris Osgood, all he did in the NHL was win. And he won in Detroit, and he won in St. Louis. He played pretty well in New York for the Islanders as well. Then he went back to Detroit and won some more, and yet he's not Hall of Fame. I don't know what he does. And again, if people say, well, he wasn't the greatest. Well, Grant Fuhr had the cup rings, but he wasn't the greatest either. Having watched them play, I would put Osgood on the same level as Fuhr. Not to put down Grant Fuhr. Grant Fuhr was a great guy, but to prop up Chris Osgood as, in my eyes, being worthy of the Hall of Fame. I think that, especially that last cup ring he won that. And I really thought when he won that, I thought, that should put him over the top. And for whatever reason, it didn't. You want wins, you want playoff experience, you want really good numbers, Osgood's it. Not cream of the crop numbers, but there are goaltenders in the Hall of Fame that didn't have those cream of the crop numbers. Number 8, maybe the toughest guy in history, and we can all have that discussion about what makes the toughest player, if it's somebody who takes hits and gets back up, if it's a guy who throws the hits and guys don't get back up, if it's a guy who throws all the punches. Probert was one of those guys that he was so tough that he didn't have to fight after a while. Now, his scoring didn't last for his entire career. The scoring would peter out. He was a pretty good scorer, though, a couple years there. But with Probert, the interesting thing isn't the scoring. It's the fact that, as his career goes along, you get more respect and you don't have to fight. You just go out on the ice and give the guys one of these, and they back off. And Probert kind of had that reputation where it's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Yzerman, can you please make Mr. Probert go away? Probert, one of the toughest players in the NHL. I would love to do a list of the 10 or 20 toughest players in league history, but I don't know how you measure it. You can't just go by penalty minutes, because there are plenty of guys who were cowards who had a lot of penalty minutes. So you can't go by that. Probert, definitely not a coward. 110% not. There's no way you can look at him and put that in the same sentence. Number 7, one of my all-time favorites. Absolutely. When I was first coming into the game, He's an all-star level player for the Detroit Red Wings at a time when the Detroit Red Wings needed all-star level players, and it's Reed Larson, a defenseman who scored a lot of points and didn't have an overly long career by usual standards, but I loved Larson. It was one of those hockey cards that I was really, really excited when I got it in a pack. I don't know why. Again, when you're a little kid, sometimes you just have favorites. You're like, yeah, that's my favorite guy. And you may not really have a reason to say that's your favorite player, but he is. And for me, that was Reed Larson with the Red Wings. Larson was a pretty good defenseman, and he did go to the All-Star game. He was an All-Star for a team that didn't have a ton of All-Stars at the time. Number 6. Now, when we talk about Fedorov, we talk a lot about how he's a great two-way player and he played defense. That's all later on. When he first came into the NHL, the excitement around Fedorov was ridiculous. It was too much. And it was too much on this level that I think people had expected 120, 130 point seasons from him based on his rookie year and based on his speed and his smarts with the puck. And that really wasn't where he ended up being. He ended up being a really good player at both ends of the ice, and he could play defense if asked to. And Scotty Bowman was perfectly fine with having him on the ice as a defenseman at a time when you didn't see 4 forwards and a defenseman. Now that's common on a power play. Back then, not so much. So Fedorov got a lot of respect from me as he went along. I thought he was hyped too much in the early 90s. I was like, you want how much for a rookie card of Sergei Fedorov? Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But Fedorov, as time went along, a pretty darn solid player. So, Fedorov, a lot of respect for him. Number 5. You want to talk about earning respect. And he was a member of the Red Wings that I thought was one of the toughest players as well. And that's Tomas Holmstrom. Holmstrom, you couldn't move him from in front of the net. He scored garbage goals regularly, and he frustrated the opposition even more regularly. That was his job, and as a person who cheered for teams that he regularly beat, it is hard sometimes to look back at that era and not get mad at Detroit all over again. But for me, Holmstrom's on the list. Shanahan is not on the list. Chelios is not on the list as examples of Hall of Famers that aren't in my favorites, who are on those teams as well, Brett Hull. But Holmstrom belongs there. Holmstrom is one of those things where your team loses a game, your favorite team loses, and you go, man, it makes you so stupid, Red Wings. But, man, that Holmstrom guy, he is so good. He makes me so mad. He's so good. So, Holmstrom, that could be a good list, too. Top 10 guys who make you angry as an opposing fan because they're so good at their job. Holmstrom. That'd be a Holmstrom award if he actually had an award. Number 4. Number 4 on the list. Go with... Yeah, number 4. Somewhat in the same vein as Pavel Datsyuk. Pavel Datsyuk is one of the best players that ever wore a Red Wings jersey and scored almost a point a game. I think it's 918 points in 953 games, somewhere in that region. And he's another one that he could have scored 1,000 points, probably should have scored 1,000 points. Left before he had to. And I respect that. I respect a player leaving the NHL before the team says, you really should go. I do. I respect that. And so Datsyuk, definitely one of my favorites. Again, even though he was regularly beating teams that I was cheering for instead of Detroit. So, a respected player, and at times during his run in the NHL, he would finish pretty high on the list. When you asked NHL players who the best player was in the league, he would get votes. I always find it funny when you ask players who are in the National Hockey League who the best player is, who the best player is, and they say, and then we as fans go, oh, how do they know? What? Of course they know, because they're in the league. They're playing. They know who the best guy is. They talk to each other. They watch hockey games. They play against him. They're like, man, how did he get around me? And Datsyuk would have been one of those guys that they said, wow, every part of the game he's good at. Number 3. And we're into the thick of it now. This is going to This is going to be unpopular, isn't it? It's going to be unpopular that Nick Lidstrom's number 3 and not number 1, isn't it? Or number 2 even. Yeah, Nicklas Lidstrom, pretty solid career. And that's understating it. One of the best defensemen in the history of the National Hockey League. Absolutely. He did suffer through the fact that he's there during dead puck era. If he had played during live puck era, probably multiple 100-point seasons. If he'd played on other teams, he might have had more points. But he's a Red Wing for life, and just his totals are insanely good. I would put him up with, say, like, the only comparison I can think of where a defenseman spends his whole career with one team and produces really well overall and just has that level of respect is Denny Potvin with the Islanders. That's the category I would put Lidstrom in. Lidstrom ahead of Potvin, but in that same sort of sphere. Lidstrom was the best defenseman in the league for a long time. And what's interesting is he was the best defenseman in the league before he was winning Norris trophies. And then there was a Norris trophy he won. It escapes me which season it was, but there was a Norris trophy he won towards the end, which I thought, he probably doesn't deserve it this year because of who else was in it. Not to besmirch him, but I didn't really pay a lot of attention because there were years that he should have won it and he didn't. The Norris is a really tough one because there are so many really good defensemen in the NHL. Number 2. And people who follow my channel should know that he's going to be in at number 2. So, when the Red Wings started winning Stanley Cups, I was very happy for Igor Larionov. Larionov came over, played for Vancouver, and of course, as I said in the video this morning about San Jose and Detroit, he ends up going to San Jose after taking a year off to go to Switzerland because he doesn't want Red Army to get any money from the Vancouver Canucks anymore. He doesn't want an NHL team to send money back to the former Soviet Union. And so he ends up leaving Vancouver, plays in Switzerland. A year after, comes back and plays for San Jose. Knocks Detroit out in the first round. And Detroit says, that's the guy we're going to get. And they pick him up. Larionov is really, in all honesty, one of the greatest players I've ever seen in terms of passing and leadership. His passing is fantastic. And he would have put up Adam Oates-like numbers if he'd played in the NHL in the 80s. He would have put up some really, really good numbers. And if you have him, Makarov, and Krutov together in the National Hockey League, that KLM line was so good. Like, I can't describe it to people who wouldn't have seen it. I can't legitimately describe it for fans who are too young to have seen it and do it any justice, except that it was the best passing I had ever seen in hockey. When those 5 guys run the ice, and it was Fedosov on the blue line with Kasatonov, and I'm trying to think of who it was before Kasatonov. There was another one before Kasatonov. But basically, Red Army would come over, and you'd watch their passing and go, holy crap. And Larionov was usually one making those passes. Crisp, on the tape, every single time, seeming to know absolutely where everybody else is going to be on the ice. And maybe that's because of the tough, really tight ship that they kept, and the fact these players didn't have a life outside of hockey. But Larionov, absolutely one of the smartest players I ever saw play. So when his offensive skill was dropping when he went to Detroit, it didn't matter. He was still one of the smartest players on the ice. And number 1, it can't be anybody else. There are times where the most talented player on the ice is also the hardest working player on the ice. And this is one of those times. Steve Yzerman, you guys know what I'm writing. I don't need to finish writing it, but I will. Steve Yzerman, up until the time he won the Stanley Cup, there were certainly questions. I don't know why I can't write this. I don't know what's going on. All right. There we go. Steve Yzerman. He was the face of the Red Wings during their disappointments and their defeats and their upsets, and then he became the face of victory. And once that first victory came, it made the other ones a little easier. I remember the year that they knocked out Vancouver, he was playing on one leg. They won the Stanley Cup. And I remember saying, well, I'm happy for Stevie Yzerman. The hell with the rest of the Red Wings, but I'm happy for Yzerman because he showed his heart. He showed that he would fight through anything. And he was in so much pain during those playoffs that it's not the scoring that wins me over for Yzerman. It's the leadership, and it's the playing through pain, and it's the cup rings that he wills the team to. And he was just one of the best all-around players. Not the most talented overall player. That I would still give to Gretzky in terms of all-time players that I've watched, but Yzerman was crazy good. He really, really was. I really think that Steve Yzerman was my all-time favorite player with the Red Wings for the reason that it was just all of his hard work. I apologize there's no current Red Wings on the board. Tyler Bertuzzi has a good chance of getting here. He does. And Dylan Larkin has a good chance of getting here at some point too. Just I couldn't not have Chevy on the board. It's just how that works. Because Cheveldae was... He underachieved, sure, at times, but man, he played 72 games that one year. They just rode him into the ground. So, and then I think it was 67 the year after, 69 or 67 the year after. They rode him into the ground. But Yzerman, they rode him into the ground too, and he just kept going. When other players would have said, you know what, I need a week or two off here to get my leg back, he said, nope, I'm going to go back out there and I'm going to keep playing. And it's play like that really makes me admire a player. So there you go. Stevie Yzerman, my all-time favorite member of the Detroit Red Wings, which won't surprise anybody. The reasons why, though, could. In that it's not because he was the most talented, it's because of his heart and his drive to play through injuries that other players would have said, forget it. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thanks for watching my videos during this downtime where everything is just, the economy's kind of done, but I'm making videos because what else am I going to do? Like, I've had people saying, well, you should take a few days off. And do what? Well, what would I do? So I already work from home, so my work is right here. It's right here. So I live where I work. So there will always be videos getting put up. And so there will always be content for you fine people, no matter how stressful things are out there. I will be in here providing content for you guys. Stay home, stay safe as much as you can, and I will talk to you guys again soon.